Hey everyone, this is Mark Phillip at Studica, and I'm going to be doing an introductory tutorial series for Unity 3D. I did a tutorial series about 3 years ago for Unity 3.5. I've been wanting to update the material for a newer version. Fortunately, Unity 5 just came out about 2 weeks ago. I got the license for it, and I'm looking to basically update the content I used to have to a newer version. So basically what we're going to cover is how to make a first-person controller, how to make terrain, how to deal with collision, how to do a little bit of scripting and skyboxes, and I'm going to look into shooting a projectile, and then I'm also going to mess with some of the new audio mixing features that are offered in Unity 5 to give you a bit of an idea of what we'll have ultimately. This is my project. I have this terrain here, I have a skybox, and when I play my game, we have some sounds. I'm able to move around. I'm able to shoot a fireball. I'm able to hit the ground and everything. So that's essentially what we're going to be going over, is basically how to get those, how to get those basic functions working within Unity. So the first thing you guys need to do is go to unity3d.com, and you'll be brought to this website here. And at the top right of that site, there's a link that says Get Unity. Now you'll be shown a chart that says Personal and Professional Edition, shows you a bit of the features that you can compare and contrast. If you're looking to just use the Personal Edition, which is the free version, you can go ahead and download it. Just to touch a little bit on the differences beside what you see here, one big question people have is, if I use the free version, am I able to sell my game commercially? Yes, you are. According to Unity Software License Agreement, the way it works is if your game pulls in $100,000 or more of revenue, that's the point where you have to actually pay Unity some kind of fee or license fee, even if you use the Personal Edition. So if you're looking to just do some basic stuff, you're just starting out and you're really not expecting to go above 100 grand, you can use the Personal Edition to create your game and sell it on the Android marketplace or wherever you want. You won't have some of these features available to you. If you have the professional version, you will get a lot of these features. The stuff that I'm covering in this tutorial series should all be available with the Personal Edition. So to actually get it, hit the free download button, and here you can choose the platform, Windows or Mac OS. I'm using Windows for the sake of this. However, to my knowledge, there's not a big difference between the two. So if you have a Mac, you should be able to follow along. Hit download installer. This is going to download an executable for you. Run the executable and install it like you would any other piece of software. There's really not a whole lot of customization as far as the installer goes. If you're looking to purchase Unity, you can go to the Professional Edition and click the link here, and you can get some options. If you are a student or teacher or faculty, or you represent an academic institution, I definitely recommend checking out our website at studica.com/Unity. We offer discount prices for educational employees and faculty and students, as well as institutions. So if you are a student, you simply can purchase for a huge discount and get like a full educational version that has all the professional features that you see for Unity Pro. But you get it for a lot cheaper than you would get it normally. And basically you just provide proof of your educational status as like a student at a college or a high school, and you can get that discount. So that's studica.com/Unity. All right, so once you have Unity installed and you run it, this is the screen that you're going to get. You're going to have your projects listed here. Assumingly, you won't have anything here currently. There's a Get Started section, which will tell you a little bit about Unity, as well as where you can go to get some help if you need it. And then down here, there's links to their tutorials and documentation, as well as the forums. I highly recommend, if you're serious about getting into Unity, checking all this stuff out. The documentation is very helpful with scripting API. And the tutorials are really cool because they give you full project files with completed assets and scripts and everything. So you can look at it and kind of figure out how to build a game from the ground up using the tutorial files. And the community has the forums where there's a lot of helpful information. There's a lot of great people helping each other out with scripts and questions or issues that you might be having in Unity. So definitely check that out if you're serious about getting into Unity. What we're going to do for the sake of this is go ahead and create a new project. And you're going to be asked what the project name is. So here I'm just going to call this Unity tutorial. And my location is my D drive under Unity. You might have something different. Wherever you want to save your files, save it there. You can click the triple dots here and browse to a folder location. And here you can choose 3D and 2D. Now the only difference I could find between these is it determines how your workspace is set up for Unity. So if you choose 3D, it's going to default to a 3D view within Unity. And it's also going to create two default assets for a main camera and a directional light source. And it's also going to create a skybox for you. If you do 2D, what that's going to do is automatically set your scene up for a 2D perspective. It's not going to create a skybox, and it's not going to add a directional light. Now, it's kind of, I would say, a little bit pointless because you can go back and forth and change these things within your workspace no matter what you choose. So for the sake of this tutorial, I'm just going to do 3D. And then here where it says asset packages are basically packages of, well, it's like it sounds, packages full of assets that are imported into your project. So for the sake of this project, I'm going to go ahead and just select all of them. I'm going to make this easy. We may not use all of these, but I'm just going to go ahead and do it anyway. And if you see anything weird in my list that you don't have, such as Terrain Toolkit, these are extra packages that I've downloaded that I will talk about in a later tutorial video. So don't worry about this stuff right now. We'll go over it later. So once you're done with that, or once you've selected all, just hit done, and then you hit create project. And then Unity is going to create the project and bring those assets in. Now, since we selected all those assets, this might take a minute or so to actually import all of the assets, depending on the hardware of your computer. All right, so once your project's made, you'll be brought to basically an interface that looks like this. Never mind all the assets I have down here. I've opened up a project that I was already working on. You won't have this stuff listed in yours. You'll have a couple of these, like the editor folder and materials folder. A lot of this stuff, though, is custom, so don't worry if you don't have this stuff down here. I'll get to that later. So when you first open the project, you're going to get basically an empty viewport with a skybox on it, and you'll have a main camera and a directional light, both of which you can choose over here under the what we call the hierarchy. The hierarchy in Unity is a list of all of the game objects that are within your scene that you can manipulate. And you'll notice when I left click on either of these, if you look over here at the right side, this is what's called the inspector. And the inspector is basically it's the list of components that are a part of the game object that you have selected. So when I click on main camera, we see that the main camera has a transform, which is an XYZ position in 3D space. If you're familiar with Maya, Max, Blender, any 3D modeling software, you're probably familiar with what the transform is. It's basically the XYZ coordinates of your game object. We also have a camera attached to it, a camera component rather, and the camera component has so many properties about it that you can manipulate and modify. We'll talk a bit more about that later. We have a GUI layer, a flare layer, and an audio listener, which allows the camera to pick up on audio sources within our scene, which allows the player to hear stuff within the game. You can also add components. Again, we'll go into this later. The main camera also has a name that you can change. You can tag it. You can change layers. Tags and layers I'm not really going to get into in the scope of this tutorial. If I look at the directional light too, you'll notice that it has a different set of components. It still has the transform. Pretty much every game object is going to have a transform unless you're making a game object that for some reason you don't need within this within the 3D space of the game. And then if you look at the directional light, the only other thing it has is a light source, which you can manipulate and change, say, the color of the light, the intensity, and so on and so forth. I'm just trying to illustrate sort of how the Unity interface works. So the inspector is where the bulk of your functionality is going to be given to your game objects. Now, if I look under the project tab, which is down here near the bottom, I have basically a hierarchy structure. I have a list of favorites, which I'm not going to go into for the scope of this tutorial. And then I have an assets folder. Now the assets folder is actually located within the root folder of your project. So for instance, if I go to my computer, open up D, and I go under Unity, I look under Unity 5 project, this assets folder here is what is dictating everything listed under here. So if you have something, on your desktop that you want to bring into your assets, you could just as easily drag that file into here, and it's going to update and place it into your assets folder here in Unity. Likewise, you can go up to assets and hit import new asset and choose stuff to bring in. But if I look at my root assets, this is basically where you keep all of your different, assets within your game, whether it's a script, whether it's a material or a mesh, whether it's a sound file or a scene. This is where all of it goes. And I'm pretty unorganized in my project. You'll see I have models, animations, prefabs, I have scenes, like everything tossed together. Ideally, you want to create, folders to throw everything into, and you can easily do that by right-clicking in here and hit create folder. You can also add assets just by right-clicking and choosing the things you want. And then a few other things we have up here near the top of the viewport. We can change the shading mode so we can look at our scene in a different way. I'm not going to go much into this. It's pretty self-explanatory though. If you go into wireframe, you won't get shaded models. You can get shaded wireframe. It's not going to be filled in meshes and stuff like that. The 2D button here will automatically put you into a 2D perspective and lock you into it. If you're working on 2D games, this is by default how you work. If you undo that, it will put you into a 3D perspective, which allows you to rotate the view cube around as necessary. And another thing is mouse controls. So if you use the mouse wheel, you can zoom in and out like such. And if you hold the right click, you can do a look around like this. If you press in the middle mouse wheel, you can pan like such. And then if you left click, you can select game objects, or you can create a selection box around game objects. Up here, you can also toggle the built-in lighting on and off. Now, you're not going to notice much because I don't have any objects currently, but when you turn this on and off, it will change things such as ambient lighting and how your directional light's behaving within your scene. You can also turn on and off audio effects using this, and then you can use this guy to turn off the skybox and other features such as fog and lens flare and animated materials. You can also look at the game scene, which is going to show you the perspective from your main camera. I typically only work in scene, but the game will show you what your camera's looking at currently before you actually play the game. And then the animator is used for manipulating animation controllers, which I'm not really going to get into with this tutorial. And then down here, again, where we have the projects, we have the console, which will show me different scripting errors or warnings that I might get. And then there's also an audio mixer section, which is new to Unity 5, and I will get into this in one of these tutorials. So the first thing that I'm wanting to do is create a basic game object, like a plane that we can walk around on. So to do this, Unity makes it really easy. You go up to Game Object here on your menu, and we can go to 3D Object, and what I'm going to do is create a cube. And if you press F while this is selected, F is in Frank, it's going to go ahead and zoom in on this object for you. Now what I want to do is scale this. So I'm going to choose the scale option here. I'm going to scale the Y-axis down a bit. I'm going to scale the Z and the X out to create something that's pretty large that I can put a character on and move them around with. So once that's done, I can go up here and select my normal selection tool again, so I'm not scaling stuff. So now if I take a look at the cube, just to kind of go over the inspector a little bit, the cube has a transform, which we can see its XYZ location in the 3D space. It has a mesh filter, which is essentially this. It gives the game object shape. So normally a game object is just a transform, a point in 3D space, but by adding a mesh filter, it is able to be any of these models that I have available to me. This prefab that Unity has creates a cube. And then it also has a box collider, which the box collider is used for determining collision, and you can also use scripts to access the collision functions and give more functionality to your game, such as if a projectile hits the box collider, it's going to destroy itself, for instance. And then the mesh renderer is used for material, and this is just using a default like gray material, so there's nothing too special about the mesh renderer. Now what we want to do is create a first-person controller, and Unity makes that very simple because it's part of the standard assets. Now to actually get there, what we can do is look here in our project window and look under the standard assets folder. And if we look under characters, we will see a first-person character option, first-person character folder, and then we'll see a prefabs folder. And then under the prefab folder, we'll have two different things. We have an FPS controller, and we have a rigid body FPS controller. I'm only going to use an FPS controller. I don't want to use the rigid body controller. So to bring this into my scene, I literally just drag and drop this onto my area here. And once it's in here, I can move it up and down, around wherever I want to go. I could rotate it, I could scale it using these tools up here. Now, the thing I want to point out is I want to talk about what a prefab is. If I look at my FPS controller in my list, you'll notice that it's got blue text. This indicates that's a prefab. And what a prefab is basically a pre-made asset that has different assets applied to it, and it's something that you may want to replicate, within your game in different places. So for instance, if I look at the FPS controller, we'll notice that there's a drop-down arrow, and we'll see that there's a first-person character game object underneath the FPS controller object. Now, each of these have their own components attached to them. It's just that they're both part of the same object. And this also means that if I move my FPS controller around in 3D space, that the first-person character game object moves with it. However, if I move the first-person game object around, then the FPS controller does not follow with it, because the first-person character is a child of FPS controller, but the opposite is not true in this situation. Prefabs are very powerful. As you create your own assets, you'll be creating a lot of prefabs. So this FPS controller by default, if we zoom in on this using the F key, we don't really have anything. All we have is this spherical area here, which determines the collision of it. And then we have the first-person character object, which is just a camera and an audio listener. So this is essentially where you're going to be seeing from. And the FPS controller has all of the things such as the FPS controller script, which comes with Unity. It's part of the standard assets, which is what's so cool. You don't have to actually script your own FPS behavior. However, they have all of these different functions that you can modify. So if I go ahead and play this real quick, here's what we'll see. So I'm able to look around, I'm able to walk and do my thing. And you'll notice when I walk, I have a head bob. That's part of Unity 5's new FPS controller script. That used to not be the case. So I can look around, I can jump with spacebar, so on and so forth. And if I wanted to, say, change the rate at which my mouse looks around, I can look under the mouse look section under the first-person controller script here in the inspector, and I could put this up to 10 on the X sensitivity and 10 on the Y, for instance. Now when I play, I'm actually able to look around much quicker. I'm going to leave it here because personally I like a higher sensitivity. If you don't like a higher sensitivity, you can leave it at 2 or experiment around with it a bit and see what you like. One thing I noticed, I usually play FPS games inverted on the Y-axis. I know I'm crazy, but if you want to invert the Y-axis, all you've really got to do is change the Y sensitivity from 10 to -10. And now when you play, what is going to happen is up is down and down is up. So basically whatever value your Y sensitivity is, just put it in the negative. So even if it was like 5 normally, put it at -5, and that's going to swap the Y-axis from up is up and down is down to up is down and down is up. But you have all these different options. You also have a walk and run speed. You can run by holding down the shift key and moving with WASD. You have jump speed. You can mess with the gravity multiplier. You can even mess with the head bob, the jump bob. You can change the different sounds if you want jump and land sound. you get the idea. There's a lot of functions here, and this is all part of the prefab that comes with Unity, which is really cool. And one thing I want to point out is that our first person character is a camera. However, we already have a main camera within Unity that comes by default in our project. The thing is, we only want the one camera in a first person shooter. We're only going to be following the one camera. And when you have multiple cameras, the audio within Unity starts to get confused. It doesn't know which audio doesn't know which audio listener to reference, the main camera or the first person character. So we're actually going to delete this main camera item here from our hierarchy. So left click on that, you can just hit delete and kill it off. And now when I play, when I touch the ground, you hear my character hit it. And when I walk, you can hear my footsteps. So beforehand, it wasn't doing that because we had the main camera in the scene still, and the audio listener was getting confused. They didn't know whether to listen to audio from the first person character or from the main camera. So now that we have this as our only source of audio listening, we're able to hear the sounds that are specified under the first person controller script. The rigid body component is used for physics. It gives the object mass and drag and angular drag. It interacts with gravity, so on and so forth. And you can manipulate this to kind of change the way your character moves and the way it is affected with gravity and things like that. And then the audio source, the point of this is to be able to utilize these jump and landing sounds. So the audio source allows audio to come out of our character, which is how when we walk around, that's why we can hear all of the footsteps and the jumping sounds and the landing sounds. It's because we have audio coming from this character. Sorry, we have audio coming from this game object, and then we're listening to it using our first person character camera. Say we want to give this character a better look, because right now it's nothing. It's just I zoom in on it again, all I've got is the camera and the audio listener. Like, that's the only way I can see where my first person character is. Maybe I want to add something different to that. So if I look at FPS Controller, what I can do is hit add component, and I can go under mesh, and I can add a mesh filter, and I can click this over here. I can click the little circle arrow here, and I can look through a list of assets that are available to me. Now, assuming you imported all the packages properly when the project created itself, you should have a lot of these assets. Some of them you won't. Some of them are customized that I have in my project. I'm going to go ahead and use this Ethan body mesh, and you can see, let me make this a little bit bigger. Oh, there we go. You can see down here, you can left click and kind of rotate around. This is one of the default Unity assets. I believe this is part of one of their tutorial packages. I'm going to go ahead and double click on Ethan body. And then what I'm going to do is add another component for mesh render. And the mesh render is where you specify materials. So you'll notice when I didn't have the mesh render, we couldn't see the Ethan body at all. So if I'm focused on here, now I turn on the mesh render, and all of a sudden I have a mesh that I can see, but there's no material applied. So here where it says element 0, this is where you specify a material. So you click this circle again, and I'm just going to choose, I don't know, you can choose anything. I'm just going to choose like this second one, this aircraft fuselage white, which is probably unnecessary because it apparently is supposed to be for an aircraft, but I don't really care for the purpose of this. I'm not focusing much on modeling for this tutorial. If you are a 3D modeler, I'm sure you can do much better than what I'm doing here. Now, so the mesh render is going to give materials to this object. So now if I look at this, he has materials attached to him. You can see all these weird objects on him because it's an aircraft fuselage. It's not like a character, but it gives them some flavor. So I'm just going to leave it, even if it looks a bit ridiculous. Now, the other thing is he's rather small. I'm going to go ahead and scale him up a bit. And the other thing I want to look at now is the position of the camera. So if I look at my camera, it's like right now it's kind of in his crotch, which we don't want. We want the camera to be more up near where his head is. So I'm going to move this up to his head area. So now my camera is in the proper spot, and what I can do now is play, and now I should be able to walk around. Now it's kind of weird because if I look down, I can see inside of myself kind of awkwardly. You know, these are things that you would want to fine tune. I'm not going to get into it much in the scope of this tutorial. You can also see my shadow on the ground. You'll notice as I walk, I have no animation currently. Now again, I'm not going to get into animation in this tutorial series, so we're just going to live with this completely static model for now. But the main thing is that it gives me a representation to look at in my scene as I work. So to illustrate kind of how the colliders work, what I want to do is I'm going to left click on my cube here, which was my plane, and I'm going to look at the box collider here. I'm going to go ahead and turn that off by unchecking it. And now if I play, you'll notice that I just fell entirely through that object. And that's because we got rid of the box. Without that box collider there, our rigid body object cannot interact with it, so it just falls straight through. Having the rigid body component attached to this controller allows my controller to basically it allows the controller to know when it's colliding with something else, and it will keep me from falling through it. Also, having the rigid body gives you more functionality within scripting to deal with collision, which I'll get into a little bit later. So now we've got the basics here. What I want to go into in my next tutorial is how to add some more functionality to this to allow my character to shoot a projectile. So that will get into a bit of scripting as well as some game design logic with how to spawn things and stuff like that.